Hi, it's Joy from the Rev Femme Rebellion, and tonight my short is Ben, the Dalmatian, eating his dinner because he is adorable. In my last video, I talked about accompanying my best friend to go to the emergency room to get a rape kit done, called a safe kit or a crisis unit. It's the rape crisis unit was the actual unit that was traveling between hospitals and clinics to provide this service of a safe kit, which is what most people would know as a rape kit, and it stands for sexual assault forensic exam. So you have a safe kit and a safe nurse, and you're getting this exam done, which includes everything, taking samples, it includes taking pictures and talking to you, and there's a lot of steps to it. And the crazy part to me, looking back, was that they were completely overwhelmed. That's what the hospital told us, the unit is completely overwhelmed. We were there on a Wednesday morning. They were overwhelmed on a Wednesday morning. So I cannot imagine what it must be like on the weekends, near holidays. Crazy. So the last video, I wanted to be short, and it ended up not being so short. So this video will be short. It's also very cold up here. So I wanted to talk about how she actually ended up reporting, because in my last video I talked about how the cop that came to take her statement as part of this kit that she got done as part of this process, basically bullied her out of doing it and intimidated her and re-traumatized her, so she chose not to report at that time. So I wanted to talk about actually reporting and how that went. So she lives in Maryland, and that's where and I always need to remember to preface, I have her full permission to talk about all of this, and she encourages me to talk about this because this is just, everyone should know that this process is completely flawed. And also, if you know about it and you're able to help other people through it, you know more what to expect, how to defend yourself against some of these gigantic chasms that survivors fall through when trying to seek help. So after she was discouraged, basically, I mean, the cop would say he was encouraging her, but ultimately it ended up discouraging her from reporting. He told us when we asked, well, where does she report when she's feeling better and ready to? And he said, just call 911. Kind of like he said it like a question, like, just call 911? And we said, call 911? He's like, yeah, just call them. So we ended up doing that. I believe this is where, I'm not sure exactly, maybe a week later or so, we went. I don't remember the exact timeline, but when we went back, or when she had decided she was ready to report, she called 911, and they got very upset. They got very, very upset because it's an emergency line, and it was not an emergency while we were calling. And I mean, we were being yelled at, and I barely got out the words of, a police officer told us to call this line. I'm sorry. Like, do you know where we can call? And they pretty much said, call 311, and hung up. And telling us, like, how inappropriate it is to use that line when it's not. So another discouraging factor that was thanks to the police officer who told her to call 911 when she was ready to report. That was incorrect. So she ended up calling her local precinct and telling them she wanted to report. And they said, well, the crime happened in North Carolina, so you're going to have to ask that city, that police department, to take the report. And so we called them, and they said in order to initiate the report, because she got a kit done, a safe kit, they needed to have a release form from the hospital or whatever. They needed a hospital release form, a waiver that she could sign, releasing her kit into their custody to send off for testing. So we called the hospital, and they said that they didn't have them and that they came from the cops. So the police department should have it. So we called Baltimore Police Department and said, my friend, we said she got a safe kit done. She needs a release form to send it to the police department so that it can be tested. And they said, well, our release forms say Baltimore specific hospitals. So we can't just cross out Baltimore and write in the other city. You're going to have to go to that police department and ask them for their release form. So we call the other police department in North Carolina. And I kid you not, they say, well, our release forms all say North Carolina hospitals. We can't just cross out North Carolina and write in Maryland. Okay, so no one can help us. You would have thought it was the first time anyone had handled an out-of-state rape kit transfer. No one had any idea what to do or where to point us. What does that say about how often these kits are actually getting tested or in the hands of the police, right? So we actually had to go physically to the ER, back to the hospital in Baltimore, and we waited for hours. You wonder, were they sitting back there typing it up while we waited? And they finally came out with a form for her to sign to release the rape kit. But it was an entire day long process of calling on, being on hold over and over, getting the runaround between all of these organizations, these institutions that should know better, should have these policies strictly, firmly in place of how rape kits get handed in between and what the process is and how to communicate that to the victim. Not only did it take all day, and it was extremely frustrating, but we also got yelled at on speakerphone by 911 because of bad advice from a police officer. And by the end of it, both of us were exhausted. As if it's not hard enough to deal with all this, as if she wasn't already dealing with the trauma and the stress of what happened. She had to tell her husband, who reacted with anger. And on top of that, now she's being yelled at by a 911 operator. And I don't know how it would be possible for any survivor to go through this process without a victim advocate. Most of the calls I initiated, or I was on speakerphone doing the talking because she was just overwhelmed. She needed an advocate. And luckily for her, I was happy to be one. But most people don't have someone close enough or that they trust enough or are comfortable enough with to ask for that help, much as having someone who has any idea what to do with that. It's very rare for that to come together for someone. And because it just was this serendipitous shitstorm of events, it led me to doing this, helping her and being a victim advocate before I even knew what it meant to be one. And wow, we are needed. We are desperately, desperately needed. And it's amazing how much victim advocacy is picking up the phone and making these phone calls, is laying out options that don't seem overwhelming, but when you've been traumatized, you just can't even look at 3 different options for police departments or hospitals or forms. It's a lot of these little steps that seem a lot bigger to someone who has just been through something so horrible. So in the end, we did get the rape kit released, the safe kit released. But it was, they made us work for it. And there's many situations where we, without the right support, without the right mindset, would have given up before that. So anyway, that's just one more stepping stone in this story. Thank you for listening, and I will talk to you tomorrow.